I'm going to start off with a quote from Nisargadatta Maharaj. I'm a fan of his stuff. I've read his book, I Am That. This quote I found just as something that came up on the internet. It, it goes like this: would people know that nothing can happen unless the entire universe makes it happen, they would achieve much more with less expenditure of energy. So, nothing can happen unless the entire universe makes it happen. Um, I think it goes well with astrology as a practice because um, it's not to say that the planets and stars are literally making things happen, but if you look at astrology as a study of this kind of acausal synchronicity where things aren't making things happen, but they go together. We can see that there's people use the expression that when things really come together, it's like the stars must have aligned and everything lines up to make something happen. And I think that is kind of like gets to the basic spirit of what astrology is all about. But I think there's something where we have this idea of causality. I have to also admit that this is something that came up in the course I am taking from J.F. Martell. That's a really great course. If it ever comes up again, I recommend people take it. It's on art as a spiritual practice or art and spiritual contemplation. So I'm kind of like I as they say, Mercury steals the cow. I'm stealing some ideas here, but there's something about causality which I mean, when I was reading I Am That years ago, there is a chapter fairly early on in the book where Nisargadatta addresses the issue of causality. Um, and basically says that nothing really causes another thing to happen because for any one thing to happen, you need to have a nearly infinite amount of things are contributing to the occurrence of any one single thing. And an easy example to use would be a tree. Um, if you look at a tree, obviously trees need rain and they need sunlight for your basic photosynthesis, right? If you take away the rain, you don't have a tree. If you take away the sunlight, you don't have a tree. Um, and so we look at trees as their own individual thing, and yet their existence is dependent on a whole weather system. And that even that is just kind of simplifying it because then you also look at obviously if trees don't just grow floating in the middle of the air. They need to be planted in the ground, so you need to have somewhere for the tree to spring up out of. And then the health of the tree is going to be determined by the nutrients in the ground. And then there might even be other factors like often a tree, let's say a nut or an acorn or something like that gets carried off by a squirrel and planted somewhere, or that like the wind blows in a certain direction that is kind of random, but that kind of determines where the actual seedling takes root and becomes a tree. And that, yeah, I mean, these are just like the most obvious things I can think of, but there could be an infinite amount of determinant factors that goes into defining this specific instance of a tree and how it takes form and how it takes shape. Um, and it's sort of so, and it depends. If you go back to the fact that it needs sunlight, it needs to be existing in a place where suns exist, where like it has to exist in a particular kind of planet on a particular kind of solar system. So it brings, if you keep the farther you keep going in it, it brings the whole cosmos into is implied in the instance of one plant. Um, I'm gonna I'm gonna give a couple examples of just like some stories that come to mind to try to illustrate the point that I'm trying to make with this. Uh, well, there's something that happened recently with a footballer. You know, I'm Canadian, so like I'm tempted to say soccer player, but I mean, I don't know. It's for the sake of an international audience, footballer seems like a better way to put it. I don't even watch sports though, so but it was such a big event that even some completely non-sports following person like myself heard about it. This guy Cristiano Rolando kind of made a scene where he was at a press conference, and it was a very corporate looking press conference with all these logos behind him, and there were like two bottles of Coca-Cola just like propped up in front of the microphone, and he pushed them off outside of the frame and made this comment. He kind of shook a water bottle and said like drink water or whatever. So and kind of giving the snub to Coca-Cola. Now, that in itself was kind of like a newsworthy thing about this guy kind of like acting out against the corporate sponsors and kind of breaking the rules and all this kind of stuff. But what I found was interesting was when this happened, apparently Coca-Cola's market share dropped exponentially. There's this huge drop in the stock of Coca-Cola, and there are news articles going around that said that basically this gesture, you know what I mean? Like this guy made this gesture, and all of a sudden, Coca-Cola's shares were crap, and it was like the power that this one guy had to. All he had to do was just make this one little gesture, and a huge corporation is being crushed by the power of this one sports hero kind of guy. But then the funny thing is that I went to go and check the article after I had posted it, and I clicked the link, and it was like a dead link, and it's like this article has been redacted, and then so I go to follow the redacted link, and um when I'm a bit distracted about stuff going on in my noises in my house. I follow the redacted link, and it says that apparently the market share of Coca-Cola had already been dropping. It wasn't like it was just hanging comfortably at this level, and then this guy made a statement, and then it triggered this huge fall of the market share. That on the day when the guy made his statement, kind of acted out against Coca-Cola, the share was already in the process of falling when the guy did the thing. And it obviously it makes a much better story if it was like this one guy did this thing and caused Coca-Cola to come tumbling down. But that wasn't actually what happened. It was like it was Coca-Cola, the market share was falling, and then this guy did this thing where he pushed Coca-Cola bottles off to the side and said drink water, and those things go together, but what that one thing did not cause the other thing to happen. They just kind of went together and created a sort of a spectacle that happened that kind of did it. It's sort of like it kind of fits together. Like it fits together better than like, you know, let's say like if it was the inverse that was happening, let's say Coca-Cola was suddenly gaining all this value, people were buying up all this Coke shares, and this guy snubbed Coca-Cola and said drink water instead, but it had the, you know, like it wouldn't really make sense for like that to happen at a time when Coca-Cola was doing really well. It makes more sense that that happens when Coca-Cola is failing, but it's not, but he didn't cause it to fail. It just happened along with the failing, right? And there's something behind this where it's like I think the actual act of being like a sports star. I mean, I don't know how famous this guy is anyways because I don't follow sports that much, but I think it goes with, to tie it in with the astrology, it goes with Leo, because Leo stands for the king, the lion. It's this sort of like it's the sign of the sun, the solar ego, the hero, the guy who is like the sports star, the guy who has the spotlight, the guy who, it's kind of a bit of like the David Goliath situation where it's like the hero takes down the monstrous corporation, and all hurrah for the, power of this one guy who had this courage to stand up and say, screw you, Coca-Cola. But it's actually, that was a complete illusion. It didn't even happen that way. But we like this thing where the one guy who can take down the whole it's like a nice kind of story to tell, but they had to redact the story because it's not actually how it happened. It just was like one thing that took place that fit in with a larger story that was happening. And I think there's something about this that you can also tie it in with. So I noticed there's also stories around Elon Musk where, we've been having these sort of like cryptocurrency bubbles, and a lot of people put all this weight on Elon Musk that if like what he will say something and make a comment and it will make stocks jump and fall and do all sorts of things. Which is, again, is basically implying this thing of like causality and causation, that like Elon Musk is become this all powerful figure, like the solar king, he was the richest man alive for a while there. I don't think he might be in second place again now, but these people who are the all powerful kingly elites, just on a whim, they say one thing or they say other things, and whole, industries or people, they all hang on the word of this one person, right? And, maybe to some extent that's true, but I think what I was saying before with like, giving the example of the tree is that, like Elon Musk didn't make cryptocurrency happen in the first place. Yeah, I mean, I guess before he did all this Tesla stuff, he was involved in PayPal. So, I mean, you could say that he is tied in with e-commerce as a business in one way or another. But he is one person who exists in a world where to count off all the number of factors of like who would have to, like, who are the people. This is kind of beyond what I'm knowledgeable about, so I don't want to spend too much time speculating or trying to fill in the blanks of what I don't know about. But there's all the people that went into creating blockchain, and people who went into creating Bitcoin, and people who went into creating all the different spin-offs like Dogecoin or whatever other one gets popular. Like there's this vast universe of different things going on. We're at a very particular point in history in which we have the technology for all this to happen. And there are so many different individuals in the backstory that contribute to the development of this technology, and we may celebrate certain celebrities as being these big figures and, prop up somebody like, I guess like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates as these big, this is kind of the Leo thing, the big, put the big spotlight on this one guy as being the who has all the say, who makes it all happen. I think that's also a criticism that a lot of people have of Elon Musk, is that he kind of takes the responsibility for being the guy who like got Tesla going, and he's like the engineer, inventor, genius, mastermind, when really he's kind of a businessman who profits off of other people's ideas, hires talented people to work for him, and like anyone else who runs a business, there's not just one dude who's doing all the stuff. There's actually probably a lot of people behind the scenes that aren't getting credit for it. And whether that, and so this whole thing about like whether a cryptocurrency gets popular or not, we know maybe part of the thing is we might to imagine that we live in a world where we have these really powerful solar figures like sports stars or people like Elon Musk or these big heads of corporations, and there's this ultimate power, like they can just say one thing or say another thing and swing things in these huge directions. But I would basically make the argument that there's a whole bunch of unseen factors that contribute to any given situation, and it's part of our own it's kind of our own illusion or our own fantasy that the world even works that way. And I think I said a Carl Jung quote that like but the fantasy creates reality every day. That there's kind of, which is a kind of interesting problem that maybe when it comes to some of these crypto bubbles, maybe it's a fantasy that like a guy like Elon Musk will just say something and that alone will contribute to the value of one thing going up or the one thing falling. But if you believe that fantasy, enough people jump on board and create this kind of fantasy bubble where, like something that doesn't maybe has doesn't really have much value on its own, generates all this value based on a collective fantasy about it. But it's kind of like an illusion, maybe. I'll give another example of something that came to mind, which is this one is less current, but do you remember that guy who got really famous from TikTok? I think he was a indigenous native guy, and he was skateboarding to the Fleetwood Mac song. What's it called? the thunder only happens when it's raining. I can't remember that. I can't remember the actual name of the song off the top of my head right now. I want to say it's like Changes or something like that, but I don't think that's what it's called. I'm drawing a blank of what the actual name of that Fleetwood Mac song is. From Rumors, though, right? The first song on Rumors. Anyways, so the Fleetwood Mac guy, he makes this video and he goes viral and achieves internet superstardom. But there's something about this, again, with like the tree kind of thing, where it's like in order for that to happen, I mean, okay, the one obvious thing is like the guy did not invent TikTok. It's like he's using an app that is constructed completely separate from him. And so like his stardom is all dependent on that. It's like that's a pretty obvious one. Another thing is the use of the Fleetwood Mac song. I have to wonder like if there is there a parallel universe where this guy decided to set his skateboard sort of shot up to a different soundtrack and people just didn't vibe with it in the same way and he didn't ever got. But no, I can think there's an interesting. There's sort of like an interesting question too about like parallel universes. Like, was there something where another universe where the things didn't line up quite in the same way, and this guy didn't get propelled to internet stardom? But part of his success relied on the fact that people like Fleetwood Mac. It's a good song, and it works for the vibe of his video. But I think there's something else about it. I read an interview, and the whole circumstance of that video was that I don't know if it was a truck that he was driving. I want to say his truck broke down, but it could have been some other kind of vehicle. But he had a mechanical issue on the highway, basically, and had to abandon his vehicle and pull his skateboard out and skateboard to work. And he just captured that moment as a video. And which is kind of funny because it's like had his vehicle actually worked, that would have never happened. He would have never become an internet star because that whole situation would have never unfolded unless his vehicle broke down. And so it kind of like there's some sort of interesting questions I think it raises about the nature of internet stardom and celebrity and gaining attention and going viral and all this kind of stuff, because it's like, I mean, what what is it exactly about that video that we're celebrating anyways? Like there's something maybe just captured a mood that was kind of poignant, and it made for a nice little clip that kind of resonated with people. But it's kind of interesting because the whole thing wouldn't have happened if his car didn't break down. And so it's like something that seems fairly arbitrary. That also seems like on its own, a car breaking down doesn't have anything to do with TikTok. It doesn't have anything to do with internet. It doesn't have anything to do with Fleetwood Mac. It doesn't have anything to do, well, maybe it has a little bit more to do with skateboarding because, your skateboard is your substitute transportation. But it's like, like and this is the one thing that I've been thinking about too, is that the internet's a weird thing because it's like all these people are trying to get popular, basically. Everybody's competing for attention. Everybody's trying to like have their 15 minutes of fame. And I'm just bringing this guy's story up as an example that his success was really something that was not in his hands at all. I mean, maybe there's to some degree he had the creative instinct to make a TikTok video and to use a certain song, but the whole circumstance that put him there to begin with was basically accidental. It's like, but that's the kind of what's kind of funny is that was it an accident that his car broke down, or was that a fated occurrence? Like he was somehow fated to have this moment of huge internet stardom, and then of course after he became an internet star, like people started giving him all this money and stuff like that, and it's like it just changed his life to some extent. I don't know the whole. I didn't look into it that much, but there's articles like that going around. But it's like I feel like we put this pressure on ourselves that we like if you think about like a secular society, a world that doesn't believe in stuff like astrology, that we basically put the personal self on a pedestal, that it's kind of like you versus the world, right? It's like if you don't make any excuses for your circumstance, your situation. If you want to go out and get rich and famous and successful, then it's all, you just have to, it's your own efforts. Like if you have to if you grind it out, if you want to become a TikTok star, you just got to go and like make all the TikTok videos and get really good at it, or something like. But it's like it's not actually how it works, is it? It's like that if what propels somebody to like stardom or to have their 15 minutes of fame might be something that's completely circumstantial, that's entirely outside of their control. And yet there's this narrative that goes around where it's like you can't make excuses. Everything comes down to your own personal choices, and that it's your own efforts, and it's like it's the heroic impulse to sort of conquer the circumstances. You like this idea we could be born into a world where all the circumstances are working against you, all the odds are against you to become this great person or whatever, but you have to like overcome the circumstances and then do it, and then it's your own. People will celebrate you and worship you as a god, right? It's kind of like the hubris, right, of that is our own personal efforts which get us to this place where we achieve the goal and all this kind of stuff. And there's something about it too, which I was thinking. The if I personally, I guess I can't act like I'm completely outside of this because like what am I doing right now? I'm here recording a video to put on YouTube, and part of me hopes that I get some views, maybe some people like the video, maybe I'll get some followers, maybe I can attract some interest in my astrology business. Like I'm like anybody else, I'm trying to promote myself. I'm trying to, get, it's like you're gardening, right? You're like watering your plants and trying to get them growing, and keeping your your hopes and dreams alive or something. Like I guess everybody does this to some extent. Um, there's something that I've been kind of turned off with though, is the thing about, like, I want to say entrepreneur culture, but I mean, honestly, I've been kind of trying to make a bit of money doing astrology. It's not even it's not even just this thing about having a business and making money or anything like that. But there's just something about this whole kind of like motivational hustle culture, like don't want to alienate too much of my potential audience here, but all this stuff about like Tony Robbins and the coaching thing and getting all motivated and all this kind of stuff. I feel like, to me, this stuff all it ties into the astrology because I feel like it kind of goes with this Leo dynamic. And the reason why I feel it goes with the Leo dynamic is, like, at one point in time I was talking to an internet friend. Like, I've got internet friends who are more into this kind of like, I don't know, it's almost like the influencer like culture or something like that. And sometimes I talk to them and I'm just kind of like, I mean, like, I get it that, like, everybody needs to make money, or like everyone's trying to get their little thing going. So it's not, it's like, I guess it's natural. But when I was talking to a friend of mine about it, I think what they expressed is that it's not necessarily always just about a materialistic thing of like, trying to get more and more and more, or like the basic, just like getting your needs met for survival. But there's something that motivates people in this, whether it's, the striving towards goal or success or something, which is, I think you could call it like self actualization, which is, there is, we're all in the process of becoming the person, you could say, who we are meant to be. We're all becoming who we're meant to be. I don't know if I really like that way of putting it, but there's something in us. But with the self-actualization, each person has their own kind of individual thing going on, and there's some desire or some sort of drive. You could, I mean, you could put it in like Nietzschean terms and call it like the will to power. That each, like the tree growing, each tree growing has its will to power to become a strong, healthy tree, and these different things are competing with each other. It can be a little bit like that, um, but it's like each person is, I think, driven in a way to somehow like be themselves and actualize themselves and sort of like come into themselves in the fullest way possible. And I think that, I mean, it doesn't have to express itself through trying to get popular on social media, but I think that that could be what's behind it. Or that, I think that when often the times this whole thing about the the drive towards success is a drive towards self-actualization. But in this whole, my whole point about this is that, do you, at any point, you have this, if you have this drive to become self-actualized, to whatever it is, make your mark on the world, do your thing, overcome your obstacles, at any, do we as people at any point consciously decide that this is what we want to do? Like, I mean, if a person is identified with this stuff, like if you if you have these desires and you say that, I want to be successful, or I want a nice relationship, or I want, material comfort and stuff like that, how would a person have the ability to say the opposite? In that, would they be able to say, you know, I don't actually want to be successful, or I have decided not to want to be successful. I've decided not to try to find the ideal happy relationship. I've decided not to have friends. I've decided not to pursue money. I've decided not to, and I've decided not to actualize myself. I've decided it's, what's the point? You know, I mean, the thing is, most people wouldn't have the capability to do that. You know, it would be like, it's like you can't, if the person has a desire or a drive towards something, it's like that thing is driving them. They don't have the ability to, you know, it's like you're not really consciously choosing what it is you want to do. It's like you're being driven towards this thing. And I would argue that with self actualization, it's a kind of a universal characteristic, it's a universal quality. Um, so, I mean, let's go back to when I started with a quote from Nisargadatta Maharaj. And the quote reads like this: would people know that nothing can happen unless the entire universe makes it happen, they would achieve much more with less expenditure of energy. So, what I'm trying to say is that even like we have this idea of like the individual conquering the odds and making this happen out of their own heroic efforts, but even the desire to do that isn't really their own desire. This is what I would argue. That the drive itself isn't really a personal drive. It's kind of this universal force that all human beings feel on one level or another. And you know, maybe in certain periods of time in history it comes out in different ways, and right now in an age where we're dominated with social media and stuff like that, it comes out, it expresses itself in that avenue in a certain way. But that, you know what I mean, like that's, it's not it, even what is what we would say is personal success isn't really, it's kind of impersonal in a way, because it's such an, it's like this universal force that's driving so many people. Even your own motivation or ambition, how can you really point to that and like take credit for it and say, like, pat yourself on the back and you know, congratulations for being so motivated and independent and driven? And it's like, where does that come from? Do you think you're doing that? Do you think that you generate those qualities all just on your own? Uh, so, I mean, to tie it in with the astrology right now, I've talked a lot about these ideas, and I've kind of referenced Leo a little bit. But what this video is about is that we're in the midst of a T square with Mars and Venus are now in Leo. Saturn is in Aquarius. Uranus is in Taurus. So we have this big T square with the fixed signs. And to be quite honest, like the whole, I feel like it goes well because the Leo solar sign, the king, the lion, has all to do with this thing about, like, you know, the conquering the odds, you know, like the drive to self actualize, especially when you got Mars there, because Mars has this, put some gas in the tank and fires it up a bit more, right? And I don't want to always bring Donald Trump up, but Donald Trump had Mars and Leo on the ascendant, so there's something about that kind of like that dominating, kind of almost bullying kind of quality that could come up with Mars, that just wants to, like, you know, put yourself at the top of everything, and it's, I'm so great, and I'm, you know, like, I'm a totally stable genius, and like, you know, like kind of self-aggrandizing, you know, that kind of the ego conqueror, I'm so great kind of thing. But when it's in that opposition to Saturn, Saturn is often represents like a kind of an obstacle, a kind of a block, a limit. It's like hitting the wall. It's something with, and so that's, we're in, this is a particularly difficult kind of astrological configuration, because I mean, oppositions and squares can be tense on their own, but you've got the two malefics traditionally opposing each other. The Mars being this kind of aggressive, kind of wants to just smash through the obstacles, go in there, raid and conquer and get what you want. And it's like coming up against like the big no that like, sorry, it's not happening right now. It's not working out. And that's, I think, basically, I mean, this is, maybe this whole video is just like a long roundabout way of saying is that I think we're in the middle of a transit where this, depending on what you're trying to do, I think it's not really the best time to expect the success of achieving your goals and having everything work out smoothly under a kind of transit like this. And this is the whole thing about the quote with a Nisargadatta is that he's talking about, you can achieve much more with less expenditure of energy. This idea of being energy efficient, that if we understand that it's not us, it's not our individual identified selves that is doing it all, that's making it all happen. Even your own personal drive to success is not even really your own. It's put this universal thing, and all the circumstances around whether that success materializes or not, it's not really in your control at all. It's like you could waste so much energy trying to make something happen when it's not going to happen. And it may not mean that it's never going to happen, but I think that's the benefit of using astrology, is that we can look at this particular moment and say, well, maybe it'll happen in the future, a few months down the line, maybe next year, but right now it's this force of Mars coming up against the force of Saturn. It's just like that, banging your head against the wall repeatedly, or it's like there's something about seeing that energy at play, and you can just say like, hey, wait a minute, if rather than trying to push this through right now, if I just eased off and I rested and saved up my energy, there could be another time where I could make the same effort and have that effort reach the goal with a lot less use of energy on my part, because it's not me, it's not all up to me. It's like whether you've got the wind behind your sails or not, or you know what I mean, like whether when things are, it's like when you're driving and all the lights turn to green at once and you don't hit a single stoplight. It's versus you go out on the wrong day and you get stuck in a traffic jam for 6 hours or something. And it's like those things are not up to your control. They may be entirely circumstantial, and you just get lucky or not. But then it's kind of funny, like, to use a traffic example, because maybe even there are times when things that appear that they're not lucky, like having your car break down the highway, somehow through some weird acausal coincidence, that triggers this thing which catapults you to more success than you could possibly achieve of your own efforts. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't, like, that guy who became like the skateboard Fleetwood Mac TikTok star was not probably not aspiring to gain that success. It was just a kind of like lucky accident that happened. And I think like this is basically my my message for this kind of transit, is that I think it really kind of puts our own personal efforts in check, because there's certain I think that's what I get from this Leo Aquarius opposition, is like you could just burn yourself out by exerting all this energy and getting nowhere, when in another circumstance you might not, you could just get lucky and get the get the thing without even trying. And yet for some reason our culture, I think, puts so much emphasis on making personal efforts. Anyways, I think that communicates my basic idea. Maybe I'll just wrap it up here. Yeah, I think that's probably good. Okay.